All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I have been working on this project since 1993, and part of the reason I have is because I just want to emphasize how important the work we're doing on developmental ed is. I mean, higher ed does lots of important things. We produce poets and astronauts and doctors and lawyers, but if your focus is on economic equity, on the American dream, on giving people who have not been treated well by our education a second chance, then developmental ed is where the rubber hits the road. And so that's where I get my energy for doing this work. So I want to start by talking about a study I did do in 1993. We had a very traditional developmental writing program at the Community College of Baltimore County. What I did was feed data into an Apple IIe computer for 4 years. Well, they gave us a computer and we couldn't figure out what to do with it. So we created this database. And what we found was this, that we started with 863 students in the cohort for 1988-89, and 57% of them passed our developmental course, English 052. That doesn't mean they passed it the first try, but they passed it sometime within 4 years. We followed them for 4 years. And then we found that 41% of them went on to take English 101. The real shocking thing was this box here, and it was actually these data in this box that were the birth of the ALP program. And what we found there was that 16% of the original cohort didn't fail anything. They passed our developmental course and gave up. They dropped out. They never even registered for English 101. That was a real eye-opener for us. And then we started thinking about the students in the box to the left, the 373 who didn't pass the developmental course. And those of us who've been teaching that course for many years are well aware that most of them didn't come to class and do all the work and write the papers and turn them in and get an F. Most of them stopped coming. In fact, it's a good semester if by Thanksgiving, half your class is still coming to class in developmental English. So we identified the problem as a problem of people dropping out and giving up somewhere along the way. What we finally found was the bottom line, although in this case it's the right-hand line since my chart is horizontal, was that only 33% of the students who started in our developmental course ever passed English 101. So one of the reasons that we discovered, that we figured out after a few years of why that happened, is something we call the pipeline approach, the pipeline effect. And here's a diagram of a typical developmental program. Could be math, could be English, could be reading. And if you have a 70% pass rate in the course 2 levels below the credit course, and 70% of the students who pass take the next course, and 70% is pretty good, I'd buy that, and 70% take the last course, do you know what your overall pass rate is? 17%. 17%. So clearly the problem is that we have all of these exit points where people can give up. And so we were looking for a way to shorten that pipeline, to eliminate some of those exit points. And what we came up with was what we called ALP. Under ALP, a student arrives, is assessed using the nasty AccuPlacer. I wish we had a better assessment, but that's what we use. And if the student is told she needs developmental writing, but if she wants to, she can take the ALP approach. And if she elects to, she registers for a section of English 101, where she's joined by 9 other developmental students, and those 10 students are joined by 10 students whose placement is English 101 and an instructor. One of the advantages to this over earlier models like the stretch approach, which was the earliest mainstreaming model for developmental writing in the country at Arizona State, one of the advantages of this is that those developmental students are in a classroom with college-level students, and so that you don't take the weakest writers and isolate them by themselves and say, you all are going to work together to become, you put them in a class where there are some stronger writers to serve as role models. You also reduce the stigma attached to being in a developmental course. You improve their sense that they're really in college, their attachment to the institution, and you provide stronger role models in the class. Now, in the same semester, our little developmental student with the red baseball hat on, also registers for a paired section of our developmental course, and she's joined there by the same 9 other students and the same instructor. So those 10 students are spending 6 hours a week with the same instructor, half that time in a very small class. Some of the advantages of the developmental part of the model are that it encourages the cohort effect, an idea we stole from learning communities, that those 10 students begin to bond and form friendships that give them a closer sense of belonging in college. It dramatically changes their attitude towards the developmental course. No longer do they resent having to take it. No longer do we have to say, pay attention, this will be really helpful next semester when you get to 101. Now it'll be really helpful on the paper you're writing this weekend for English 101. In other words, we've contextualized the developmental work inside of English 101. The small class size is really important. It allows individual attention, both to writing problems and to personal problems. It allows time for us to address those personal problems, or as we call them, non-cognitive issues in class. And finally, having the same teacher allows the 2 courses to be closely coordinated. Here's some data. This is data from a study CCRC did of us in 2012. You go to their website, you can see, if you're a data nerd, you can see all the data. But this is the same kind of chart as the one we created for 1993. But now we have much bigger numbers. So we start, and the top of the chart is going to be students who took the traditional approach to developmental English, and the bottom of the chart will be the ALP approach. So we started with over 5,000 students in the traditional class, and 65% passed in ALP. Now we were just piloting. I know Stan doesn't like that word, but we hadn't talked to Stan yet at that point. And we started with a small number of sections, 592 students in those early years, and the pass rate was significantly higher, 82% versus 65%. Now remember, in the 1993 study, that the 16%, now in this study, it's 17% of the students who give up after having passed the developmental course. Now, I wouldn't have flown all the way out here to the Mall of America if we couldn't improve on that 16 or 17%, and in fact, we brought it down to 0. How? Because we're wonderful instructors? No, we shortened the pipeline. You see, there is no exit point between, they're taking the 2 courses at the same time. They have to sign up for both of them, and they have to stay enrolled in both. If they drop one, they have to drop the other. So it is impossible to pass the developmental course and not even attempt English 101. So it's a trick, but it's a trick that saves 17% of our students from dropping out. And finally, our pass rates, you'll see, the same 33% in the traditional program versus 74% for the ALP group. And that pass rate in the mid-70s, we've just had we're now in our 8th year, and we get that result year after year. It's just, at first we didn't believe it, and now we're so happy. When my original vice president told me that I was designing a Cadillac model of developmental ed, he said, you better get Cadillac results. And I showed him these data. I said, is this what you meant by Cadillac results? He said, no, this is a Mercedes-Benz. Thank you. But sometimes people at this point say, yeah, but how do they do when they get to English 102? Now, I would like to show you that, but I'm out of room on the chart. So you're going to have to take my word. I don't think you all are going to take my word. So we'll move the chart over. And you can see that we've increased the percent. Now at our school, the second semester English 102 is not required in half of our certificate programs and a couple of AA programs. So the percentages are going to be a lot lower, but still the ALP percentage is going to be a lot higher than the traditional. So it's 13% take English 102 for traditional students, 50% of the ALP students. And how do they do in the course? Well, 10% of the traditional students pass English 102, and 33%. We actually do better on the success rates in 102. It's now 3 times as great as the traditional course. We followed our students now later into to see how many college level courses they're successful in. And the green here is the traditional course. That's the traditional developmental course. You can see somewhere in the high teens are accumulating at least 12 college credits within 1 year, whereas for ALP, again, it's about double the success rate. So it's not just helping in English courses, it's helping in retention in the college in general. And finally, completion rates. Now here our numbers are pretty small because most of these students, the students in the large cohorts have only started in the last couple of years, but you can see again, green is the traditional students, and it's going to go down each year because they've had less time to complete, but those are the numbers for the traditional students who went through the traditional course. Whoops. And here are the ALP numbers, and you can see with the exception of that cohort from fall of 2008, we've just about doubled the completion rate over the students who took the traditional developmental course. One last thing I want to say, because this is a conference focusing on scaling up, and that is when I travel around the country, we have now 200 schools that we're aware of around the country. We just got our 200th about a week ago. Sometimes people tell me, oh, the faculty are resisting this idea. They don't like the idea that something Bill and Melinda Gates made up is being forced down on them in a sort of top-down mandate, or sometimes they accuse Stan Jones of having developed ALP. And I think it's important that people know that this particular model that has had a lot of national success was developed by English faculty in a normal little English department at a normal little, well, fairly large community college in Baltimore, Maryland. And this is a result of faculty work, and sometimes when you tell faculty that, it makes them feel better about giving it a try at their school.